Yes, we can see it. Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. So let me start off by giving you all a little joke about how naive I could be. When I spoke to Maurice earlier in the week and he asked about doing this presentation, he spoke to me about, he said he wanted it for the creatives. And I was trying to figure out for the likes, what is a creative? And then he shared with me. And I had to actually go to Google and look up the definition of it. And I saw the definition as a creative is an artist, not just a painter or musician or writer, but he or she is someone who sees the world a little differently than others. A creative is an individual. And then I realized, I said, okay, now I have a better understanding. I've got a daughter who is a creative, who's also an architectural designer. So I understand the world that you live in. And what I'm hoping today is that to talk to you about mental health, but talk to you in a down-to-earth sort of way. I want this to be very informal. I have quite a bit of information that I want to share with you, but if at any point there's a question that you want answered, feel free to just indicate, just jump in so that I could elaborate or I could discuss further. So let's begin. So creatives, and this applies to you. These are among the 4 main traits of a creative person, according to Muna, and you might be surprised that you have all 4. So here is what I expect from this group, that you are risk takers, you are creative thinkers, and that you take risk, okay? That you have a dare to fail attitude. So when I'm thinking about this particular group, I'm thinking about you don't allow things to get the better part of you. You are resilient people, and you should be bouncing back despite whatever is happening in the world around you. You are willing to be different, and to be different requires that you that you're not afraid to be laughed at. You're not afraid to stand out, and you are impulsive, fickle, and you change your mind quite often. That's what happens with creative people. They switch. So you should be able to adapt to change very quickly. Now, if you are not experiencing any of these, or if you don't see any of these as characteristics of you, then perhaps we need to understand why. Why are you feeling like you can't take risk? Why are you not feeling that you can go out there and be creative? Why are you not feeling that the opportunities that are being presented to you, despite the fact that they may be slim, can still inspire you to get something done? Why are you afraid of change? So let's look at change. Whenever we meet up with change, we have to ask ourselves, do I have the resources to handle the situation? So I want you to think about it and ask yourself, do you have the resources to handle the situation? Now, I would think that if you carry the title creative, your answer should be yes, because creative people think out of the box. Creative people, when the pickings are few, come up with all sorts of creative stuff. So, do you have the resources to handle the situation? If you say to yourself, yes, I do, then I want you to begin thinking positively, that the world is out there, that there are things that I can accomplish, that there are things that I can do. But if you answer no, then it means that you are experiencing some stress, and we need to know why, what's happening. I mean, we all experience stress, but see, creative people have that special ability to be able to bounce back when there's stress. So let's go back, and I want you to really, really assess yourself. Do you have the resources to handle what we're going through? Do you have the resources to handle this particular situation? If you do, yes, yes, yes. But if you don't, let's begin to understand why. So during this pandemic, and for most of this year, people have been worried. We all worry at some point in our lives, but I want you to, that sound, don't worry, be happy. So let's explore worrying. Here's a picture of a lady who's sitting there and she's worried. She's looking at papers and she's trying to contemplate what is it that's happening. But let's begin to look at worry. Worry is what happens when your mind dwells on negative thoughts. So when we are worried, we begin to think about negativity. Worrying is associated with negative thoughts. It's associated with uncertain outcomes, and it's associated with the thought process that things could go wrong. Here's an example. What are some of the things that we worry about as individuals every day? We worry about our fears. We worry about failures. We worry about foes. We worry about health. We worry about wealth. We worry about tests that we go through. We worry about trials. We worry about safety. We worry about security. We worry about family, friends, the future. We worry about our responsibility. We worry about our problems, persons, pressures, and places. And worry tends to be repetitive. Think about the last time you worried. You worry about the same thing over and over and over, okay? And every time you catch a spare minute, you worry, you worry. It's almost obsessive. You go to sleep, you get up, you worry, you worry, you worry. Now, I want you to think about something, and let's be real practical with it. Worry only happens in your mind. Worry doesn't happen in your body. Worry is a mental thing. So when we sit around, we seem preoccupied. I'm sure you can recall someone coming up to you and say, what are you thinking about? Okay, a penny for your thoughts. And that's because for the most part, we tend to be worried. We tend to be thinking. It's a mental thing. Now, here is where creativity comes in. Because see, what worrying does is worrying stimulates our brain. Worrying gets us up and thinking. So there have been times in my life when I've become worried. Like Maurice introduced, I've got 3 kids. I've got 3 kids in 5 years. It just happened that all of my kids went off to school at the same time. So there was a point where I am putting 3 kids through college at the same time. And I worried. Okay? The thing is that worried stimulated my brain and caused me to be more creative. You see, now that's the part of worrying that people don't realize. Instead of feeling down, instead of letting worrying keep you down, what you need to do is you need to allow worrying to stimulate your brain and to become creative. Some of my most creative work, some of my best accomplishments have come as a result of my worrying. Sometimes when I sit night after night after night and I wonder, how are things going to happen? How will I fix this? How will I fix that? And then, aha, an idea comes to mind. You see, worrying is likely to cause you to problem solve. So if you are experiencing a block right now, you don't know where to turn, you don't know what to do, you're looking at the economy, you're wondering, how am I going to survive? This should be the time when you should allow not negativity to fill your minds, but creativity to fill your minds. So you should push yourself in a positive way. Worry is a way for your brain to handle problems in order to keep you safe. So now you should be doing your creative work. What do I need to do to secure my future tomorrow? That is really the emphasis at this point. Don't allow worrying to take you down the negative path. Worrying should be taking you down the positive path. Now, we've captured worrying. Let's move briefly to stress. Okay, so take a look at it. When we talk about stress, we're talking about your resources being overwhelmed. So here are a couple of questions that I want you to ask yourself. Do you find it hard to wind down? How do you tend to overreact to situations? Do you use a lot of nervous energy? Do you find yourself agitated? Do you find it hard to relax? Do you become intolerant? Okay, if anything is keeping you from doing what you want to do? And do you get rather touchy at times? Now, if you scored never on all of those things, then it means that you have a normal amount of stress. But if you are in the 3 columns, okay, you can look down, you can see that the numbers, you can be extremely severe or severe. Okay, so this is just an opportunity for you to gauge yourself where you're at. But let's talk more about stress. So stress is a physiological response connected to an external event. What do I mean by that? You experience stress physiologically, and the physiological response is connected to something that's happening externally. So basically, what happens is that there are outside external things that produce stress for you. Now, we call those things stressors. Stressors produce stress, and stress is your reaction to those forces. So it seems like common sense that if we can identify the stresses in our life, those stresses, once we can contain them, then we can move forward. But there are a couple of things that I need you to understand about stress. First of all, stress is perceptual. And what I mean by perceptual, it means that stress is in the eye of the beholder. So what is stressful for me may not be stressful for Maurice. It may not be stressful for someone else, okay? And so we have to understand that stress is perceptual. Secondly, I need you to understand that up to 80% of the visits to general practitioners' offices in the world are due to stress. So chronic stress is linked to stuff like digestive issues, increased risk of heart disease, and the weakening of the immune system. So what that means is that when you're experiencing those digestive, okay, gastrointestinal issues that sometimes take you to a doctor, it's because of stress. A lot of the heart issues, okay, a lot of the panic attacks, a lot of the migraines, all of them are related to stress. And then the weakening of the immune system. The more stressed that you are, the more times that you're going to fall prey to illness. And so I know there have been times when I've heard people say, oh, gee, I had the cold last week and this cold again, and I got to go in the sea and I got to drink Sorosy because this cold keeps coming back. Okay, the cold is coming back because your immune system is not strong enough to fight it off. And the reason why your immune system is not fighting it off is because of the stress that you're experiencing in your life. And so it's very, very critical that you begin to identify the stressors that you experience on a daily basis. So let's look at this whole concept of a stress curve. Now, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but whenever you hear talks or you read up on something about stress, it never says to you that get rid of stress, because you can't get rid of stress. I mean, the minute you, let me tell you, the only way that you will get rid of stress is the day that you die, and then you will be stressless. But until that day, you have to learn to effectively manage stress. So let's talk about this stress curve. You see, too little stress is just as bad as too much stress. So if you have too little stress, then there's an underload. You become inactive, you become laid back. If there's too much stress on the right-hand side, you become exhausted, you are filled with anxiety, panic, anger, and you could almost lose it. You could become burnt out to the point where you have an emotional breakdown. And so the optimum level of stress is where you get to the point where the stresses tire you out, but don't exhaust you. And for you creatives who are in music, let me explain something to you. It's like tuning a guitar. If you put too much stress, if you tighten your strings too much, they pop. If the strings are too loose, you don't get any good music. And so there's an art to fine tuning the tunes where you need to have the right amount of tension. And that's exactly what is required for us to do our best work. We have to have the right amount of tension. Too little, nothing happens. Too much, we become emotionally burnt out. I was telling my students at UB the other day, I said that I'm one of those persons who need the right amount of stress. 2-3 weeks before an exam, nothing happening. A week before the exam, nothing happening. But by golly, 2 or 3 nights before the exam, when I realized that if I don't do well, I'm not going to get a good grade, and my parents are going to kill me because they send me off to school and they're working so hard and they expect. And let me tell you something, everything comes together. And so there needs to be a balance. So now let's take another break, and I want you to ask yourself, where are you on the stress curve? Not enough stress, so that it's causing you to feel inactive, okay? To feel not worthy, to feel like nothing's happening. Or you are on the flip side, you're close to being burnt out. Too much stress is an overload. Too little stress is an underload. So we have to be in charge. We have to be responsible for creating the right type of balance. Now, let's get to the nitty-gritty of stress. As I explained to you earlier, stress is produced by stressors. These are the things that we put into our stress bucket on a daily basis. Imagine your stress bucket. What is it that you are putting into your stress bucket every day that's stressing you out? Let's look at it. Stressors to the right. Workload. Okay. Are you working enough, or are you not? Are you working too much? Where is your balance? Illness. Are you ill? Are you dealing with a specific illness? Or do you know loved ones who are also dealing with an illness? You see, because that creates enormous stress. Following this session, I deal with a group of young diabetics. And one of the challenges that I've found is that parents who have to deal with diabetic children are extremely stressed, because not only do they have to be worried about themselves, they also have to be worried about their children. Many mothers of type 1 diabetics talk about the fear of not being able to let those children out of their sights because they want to make sure that they're taking their medication on time, that they that they're protecting themselves, that they're not eating the wrong foods. Okay, and so that's an enormous weight. So think about the stressors that you may experience on a daily basis. Think in terms of negative feedback. That's a stressor. Think about conflict. Now, I don't know if any of you heard about Jean-Paul Sartre, who's a French existentialist, but he wrote this play, and the play was called No Exit. And in this play, persons who lived together and worked together on Earth, they were part of a group. They died and ended up in the afterlife. And when they realized that they were going to be roommates for eternity, one of them concluded, he said that, man, give me hell as fire and brimstone any day. He said, there's nothing worse than other people. He said, hell is other people. If you are in conflict with other people and you're not getting along, then that could be very, very, very stressful. Okay? And so this pandemic has brought to reality some of the conflict. I'm amazed at how many people left home early in the morning to get to work, and how many people stayed at work late, so that when they came home, they had limited interaction with the people who they lived with. And what the pandemic did was the pandemic created an environment where you had to stay home. And if you are living in an environment where there's constant conflict and you are on lockdown or you are quarantined, that can cause severe stress. I heard yesterday on the news when I was coming home that there's been a substantial rise in domestic violence. And I could understand why, because work and outings and performing and getting out of the home was an escape for many people. And now you're in a lockdown environment, okay? An entire weekend from Friday until till Tuesday morning last week. Can you imagine that? What that must be like if you are not, if you don't get along with the people that you live with? So conflict becomes a stressor. Uncertainty. We are all living in a time of uncertainty. And so that creates stress. We do not know. I'm thinking about the people who don't know how I'm going to feed my family, how I'm going to pay my next bill. I don't know when the hotels are going to open. I don't know when the entertainment industry will open again. I don't know when I can appeal to large audiences. So how am I going to survive? So that creates a lot of stress. Deadlines, unclear expectations, money worries, okay, people letting you down, family member issues, conflicting priorities, lack of sleep. All of these are stresses, and these are just general stresses. Some of us have man issues. Some of us have woman issues. Some of us got to deal with baby mamas and stuff like that. All that drama affects us. They are the stresses. And the stresses continue to be poured into our bucket. Now, if you look to the left, you also have a faucet. And so the faucet represents your ability to be able to cope with the stresses that you're experiencing every day. If as the stresses go into your bucket, there is a sensible method of relieving them, then you can actually survive. But if your faucet is not able to let out the stressors as they come into your bucket, then what happens is that they overspill. And the overspill is like what happens when you use the toilet and the toilet runs over. You see, because the flow is not adequate enough to accommodate all the mess. And so what happens is that you have an overflow. So let's look at coping strategies. You see, we have some good coping strategies. Some of us do our best work when we're under stress. Some of us write. Some of us know how to play. Some of us know how to relax. Some of us are spiritual. So we cope with it. But see, there are also some poor coping strategies. Sometimes people use stuff like they indulge more in alcohol. They become violent. They use marijuana. They use all sorts of other types of drugs in order to cope and in order to survive. So what coping strategies do you have in place? Do you have coping strategies that allow you to be productive, or do you have coping strategies that take you down the wrong path? And then just look at the top of the bucket again. Like I said, when there's no flow, when there's no opportunity for outlet, for release, what happens is your bucket will overflow. And how will it overflow? You will see signs of anxiety. You will see signs of physical decline. You will be hard, your self-control will be questionable, and then there are other severe consequences. So what really needs to happen is that we need you to begin to look at what are the best coping strategies. And we'll talk about that towards the end of the presentation. Okay, so now how do we begin to deal with stress? Well, creative people are resilient. So I need you to pull into this area of resilience. So let me explain to you what resilience is. Resilience comes from an old Latin word that means to recoil or to bounce back. It means that when you've been knocked down, it means that when you have been sidelined, that you come back. So how resilient are you? Let's look at some of the characteristics of people who are resilient. And incidentally, a lot of the definitions of resilient match the definitions and characteristics of creatives. So here is what you should be doing, creative folks. First of all, focus on your strengths, optimism. Regardless of how bad it looks, you have to maintain a level of optimism. What are your strengths? See, this is not the time to think in terms of negativity and what are the weaknesses. Focus on your strengths. You also have to develop an attitude to life to focus on action. Can do, can do, can do, as opposed to look at what's happening all around me. Can't, no opportunities. So what else is it that you can do? Emotional awareness. Keep good communication. Continue to talk, continue to talk, continue to talk. We're going to talk about depression in a few minutes, but I want you to understand, continue to talk, continue to talk. Let me just put in a pointer here. Expression is the way to beat depression. So you should, any of you who are beginning to feel low, to sink into a state of sadness or depression, what you should be doing is expression right now. That means you should be writing, you should be painting, you should be dancing, you should be creating stuff. Also, control of yourself, social support, sense of humor, okay? You have to be able to laugh at life's frustrations. Resilient people make fun of situations. They see opportunities. Self-belief. You have to be confident and you have to have high self-esteem. And then what I started off with worrying, the ability to problem solve. You have to be willing to adapt and you have to be flexible. You have to be able to go with the flow. Don't try to focus on yesteryear because yesteryear is yesteryear. It's gone. What we saw happen to our country in March, and in fact to the whole world, is what I call a change in generations, but it's also going to create a change in the way that we do things. Life will not return to the way it was pre-COVID. And so we got to accept that, and we got to be prepared now to move on. What is it that we now do with this particular landscape that we're faced with? So here are a couple of questions for you to think about in terms of how resilient are you? Do you bounce back quickly after hard times? Okay. Do you have a hard time making it through stressful events? How long does it take you to recover from a stressful event? Is it easy for you to snap back when something bad happens? Do you usually come through difficult times with little trouble? Do you tend to take a long time to get over setbacks in your life? You see, these are the characteristics of resilient people. And they are very, very, very similar to the characteristics of creatives. So you should see this as a rough time, but not as an impossible time. You should see this as what we're going through as an opportunity to achieve rather than an opportunity to fail. It reminds me of when you're taking a flight and you hit a pocket and that plane sinks and you start to say, oh Lord, oh Lord, oh Lord, am I going to survive? Okay? The thing is that in life, we're going to experience those pockets where we're going to drop. But the thing is that we have to remember that we're going to come back. We're going to bounce back. So we don't give in to defeat. We don't give in to situations. What we do is that we try to find solutions. So we worry about how we can achieve. We worry how we can become more creative. And we worry how we can become more successful. We don't see our demise. We see our success. Okay, so now let's go into anxiety. So we talked about worry and we talked about stress. And I want you to understand that the culmination of stress and worry, so the marriage of stress and worry produces anxiety. You see, because anxiety has a cognitive element. So anxiety's father is worry, and anxiety's mother is stress. So you become anxious when you worry and you become stressed. You see, worrying is mental, stress is physical, and anxiety has its experience in both our mind and our body. So when we become anxious, our mind begins to tell us that we can't do anything. And then our body reacts in a way that tells us that we're not going to be able to achieve anything. So this is why anxiety is difficult, because it encompasses our mind and our body. And what it does is it sidelines us and prevents us from doing what we need to be able to do. Anxiety happens when we are dealing with a lot of worry and a lot of stress. You see, unlike stress, where stress is a physiological issue, anxiety is really a false alarm. There's really nothing happening out there. There's really no need for us to be so anxious. It's just that because it captivates our mind and our body, it makes us feel defenseless. See, anxiety is really a fear. It's not a reality. It's a fear of the unknown. We become anxious because we're not sure what's going to happen. I said to my class the other day, I said they were anxious. And I said to them, why are you anxious? They said, because you're giving us the midterm. I said, okay, so did you study for the midterm? No. I said, what if you studied for the midterm? What if I showed you the answers? Okay, what would happen? They said, well, we wouldn't be anxious. And I said, yeah, that's right. I said, your fear, your anxiety has a lot to do with your fear. Because you do not know what tomorrow brings, that produces anxiety. So anxiety is really a false alarm. Now let's talk quickly about some anxiety events, because when people are anxious, we see several key behaviors. First of all, panic disorder. Many of you have heard people talk about panic disorders. I had a client who called me the other night. She said to me, her sister had an emergency, and they had to bring her down from an island, and all this and all that, and she's been through this before and stuff like that, and she was a nervous wreck, and she said that my heart is beating, I can't sit down, I can't sleep, I'm nauseous, I'm feeling like I'm gonna die. Okay, people who've experienced panic disorders will understand it's an attack, okay, on your mind and your body. Phobias, people who have fears of animals, fears of heights, fears of this, fears of public speaking, fears of this. And post-traumatic stress disorder also falls under anxiety. People who've gone through like Hurricane Dorian, and who've gone through traffic near-death experiences will experience post-traumatic stress disorder. And then there's social anxiety disorders, people who experience fears from just being in social settings. Okay, and so here it is, just a brief chat of anxiety symptoms. Okay, and I could always send this presentation to you. Okay, now let's go into depression. So depression comes from another Greek word, to put down, to force, to crush, to struggle. Okay, to depress, to sadden, to despirit. Okay, now depression is actually the opposite of creative. Okay, because creative is enlightening. Okay, it's progressive, it's development, it's open, it's spirited. Okay, but people who are depressed are dispirited. So creative folks, I don't need any of you to become dispirited, because what that does is it means that you've been sapped of your creativity. So we must prevent you from becoming depressed. And like I said, the key to depression is expression. So you should be thinking about, even when you're saddened, even when you are dispirited, you should be writing, you should be painting, you should be dancing, you should be taking what you are feeling and putting it out there. That's what's required of you as creatives, to take situations that possibly depressed or repressed and bring them to light. So I said to my daughter the other day, I said, look at Adele. I said, every time she has a heartache or some problem, she writes about it. Okay, she sings about it. She's made millions of dollars because she's dealing with it. I said, Jay-Z and Beyonce has some big issue. And what she does, she writes lemonade and she makes millions of dollars of it. Okay? So why are we sitting down like little Miss Muffet on a tuffet, okay, and crying about situations? How is it as creative people we are not out there, we are not bouncing back, okay, despite what's happening in the world? This should be a time to write. You should be taking the sad stories, all the struggles that you are experiencing, and you should be putting them into creative opportunities. Now that may be easier said than done, but the thing is that with the press, when you're working with the press people, you have to get them up. You have to get them going. They have to do something, because if you allow them to just sit and lay and remain in a state of depression, they will eventually lose hope. So what is it that you need to do despite the depression, despite the dispirited environment around you, despite the negativity? This is when creative people need to shine. So there's no single cause of depression. It can occur for a variety of reasons, and it has many different triggers. Okay, there's a picture of a typical depressed person. You have to understand that depression ruins lives of individuals and families. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. Okay, it prevents people from working, it prevents people from studying, it prevents people from being creative, it impairs relationships with others. It damages physical health. There's an inability to look after yourself, and there's always a lack of early visible or easily describable symptoms. So sometimes we don't even know when we are slipping into a state of depression. The symptoms of depression can be complex and they vary widely between people. So if you're depressed, you may feel sad, you may feel hopeless, and you may lose interest in the things that you used to enjoy. This is why. I remember many years ago, my great-grand uncle died, and my great-grand-aunt had slipped into a state of depression. And I was speaking with one of my psychiatrist friends, and he said, you need to get a pet. And so I spoke to her, I said, what kind of pet do you want? And she said, yeah, well, get her some parakeets, some birds. So I got her 2 birds, and she named them Joseph and Louise after her and her husband. But I'll tell you one thing, despite her depression, every morning when those birds start to chirp, she got out of bed and she fed them. And she cared for them and she cared for them. And eventually when they died, she purchased 2 more. Because you see, she needed something to get her out of bed every day to take care of. And that's critical, okay? That's critical. Stressful events such as bereavement or a relationship breakdown can increase your risk of becoming depressed. So we need people in our lives. We need to have a cause to fight for. We need a reason to get up every day in order to be able to do something. Okay, almost there. Fear and worry about your own health and the health of your loved ones, your financial situation or job or loss of support services you rely on. All of these things are playing a big role in how we feel today, and it's sapping into your creativity. I know, guys, I understand what you're going through, because even myself, I'm usually a pretty good writer, and I have had to force myself to get up to do some writing over the last couple of months, simply because this pandemic seems to just to surround you with fear, to surround you with worry, to depress you, to want to keep you down. And it's a fight. It's a fight. It's a fight. I'm telling you, it's not easy. It's a fight. But you have to tap into those creativity resources, those creative resources that you have, and you have to push yourself. You have to propel yourself to the next height. There are going to be changes in sleep or eating patterns. You wouldn't know the many nights that I got up. I mean, I would go to bed 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock I'd be up. And what I decided to do is, why should I toss and turn from 2 o'clock until morning? So I've gotten up and I've started to do things. I start sometimes with just writing a line and then writing a paragraph. You know, it's an effort, but you have to push yourself. And you have your difficulty sleeping and concentrating. okay? But I have to realize that, guess what? Stress, anxiety, and depression is not good for me, because if you have a chronic health problem, all this is going to do is it's going to just aggravate it even more. And if you already are susceptible to a mental health problem, the pandemic, the stress, the anxiety, the fear will worsen those issues. So you do not need to sit around and allow things to impact you. You have to get out there and you have to do some stuff. So last bit, what is it that we need to do? Well, I mentioned this thing with depression and suicide. There's a strong correlation between depression and suicide. A young guy last year who had attempted suicide, and I was asked to see, he shared with me. I asked him, I said, why would a 19-year-old want to take their life? And he said, sir, he said, have you ever felt hopeless? And I said, no. I said, I've gone through some stuff in my life, but I've never lost hope. He said, when you get to the point that you lost hope, then suicide is inevitable. He said, when you become depressed to the point that you lose hope, that you look around and there's no one who can come to your rescue, he said that suicide is the next thing. I hope that none of you ever get to that point where you lose hope. So, some key things. How do we bounce back? How do we become resilient? How do we maintain our mental health, despite the fact that we don't know what's going to be happening? We'll keep a schedule, okay? Keep your schedule consistent, okay? Create boundaries, okay? I looked at my phone last night and someone was calling me 10 o'clock. And I was like, why are they calling me 10 o'clock? Well, they know I am locked down, but why are you calling me 10 o'clock? I'm going to deal with that tomorrow. You see, because we have to create boundaries, unless people will take advantage of you and they will stress you right out. So you've got to set time for yourself. Incorporate exercise. Do things that lighten your mood. Take breaks, watch movies, make music, dance, play games, revisit past hobbies. Let me tell you, I am almost 60. But I found over the pandemic, my stamp album from I was in 5th grade. Now, wow, that's over 50 years ago. And the stamp collection, that was a hobby that I enjoyed. And I went back. I shared it with my kids. My kids don't even know about stamps because with emails and stuff like that, no one goes to the post office and buys postage stamps anymore, okay? But I introduced them to a whole new world. What about some of these activities that we played yesteryear? Okay, I played some games, marbles, jackstones, okay, ring play. Man, they didn't know any of those things, you know, Blue Hill water dry, nowhere to wash my clothes. This is the kind of things that we need to now introduce to keep our mental health going. Schedule time to communicate with friends, connect with family, engage in community activities, engage in virtual religions, okay, again, revisit hobbies and interests, new creative endeavors. What else can you come up with? I started genealogy as well, okay? I was saddened by the loss of my parents, and I looked at it and I said, okay, what do I need to do? Well, I started with archives, and then I went online and I found some information, and then I joined ancestry.com, and then I sent off my DNA sampling, and now that keeps me occupied because guess what? I am finding more and more and more about my connections. I've been able to go back to the early 1800s. I know who my 4 times, 5th times grandmother and grandfather were. Interesting things, you see? So now is the time to begin to explore things that you always wanted to explore. Set boundaries again when I talk about emails, okay? Don't let people stress you out, okay? Set boundaries for yourself. Also, be careful with the amount of information that you allow into your system, okay? Concentrate on the number of hours or minutes that you're gonna deal with emails, that you're gonna watch TV. You know, I found that I used to sleep with my TV on every night. and I would wake up anxious and nervous in the morning, and that's because all night long I've been hearing about the numbers, okay? The COVID numbers in the United States reaching this figure and that figure, this figure. And of course, I woke up really, really anxious because of all of the negativity. So the thing is that now I have to surround myself with positive stuff, inspirational things to keep me going. Okay, again, manage negative thoughts and feelings. Okay, I want to get a daily dose of sunlight. Now, let me share something with you that I think is critical for you. Every time that you fly, the stewardess says to you, in the event of a drop in cabin pressure or turbulence, a gas mask will drop from the ceiling. You are to put your gas mask on first before attending to other people. And for years, you know, I heard that. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me why. Well, it's simple. If you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be around to take care of other people. Now, that's a serious thing. You put your gas mask on first so that you will be able to attend, even to little children. You see, because if you spend all your time trying to attend to little children, okay, what happens to you? And what happens to you, to them in the event that you don't survive? So we have to start taking care of ourselves. We have to make it a point to put ourselves as number one. Now, number one doesn't mean that you are selfish. Number one means that you have to prioritize your health and safety. It means that you have to do what you need to do to stay on track. This is a survival game, and you have to do what you need to do in order to survive. Okay? We have to begin to play. Okay? And then we've got to manage change. We got to embrace change. Okay? Manage change and embrace change. And let me just jump here. How many of you have read Who Moved My Cheese? If you haven't, the next opportunity you have, purchase a copy of it or go online and read about it, because it's so critical and it helps us to understand what we are experiencing today. But let me just share a summary with you so that you understand. Change happens, okay? Change happens. Every time you become comfortable with a way of doing something, then they're gonna change the cards. That's just life, okay? We now have to anticipate change. You always have to get ready for the cheese to move. You have to monitor your change, okay? Which means that you have to smell cheese often so that you know when it is getting old. Man, I can let you laugh at something. I like to buy clothing from a particular store. And I became so depressed because my wife showed me it's gone out of business. And I'm saying to myself, it's gone out of business. How am I going to survive? And she said to me, she said, it's time for change. She said, you become accustomed to one way, one style of dressing. Well, now the pandemic has taught you that, guess what? You don't need to stock up on a whole bunch of stuff. So once this is over and change, and you're allowed to travel, you need to find another way of doing stuff. So it means that we have to monitor change. We have to know sometimes when things are becoming outdated, out of fashion, okay? And we have to be able to move with the times. As creative people, we have to adapt to change quickly. We have to let go some of the old things, okay? And we have to now enjoy new cheese. All my life, I'm a face-to-face person in terms of teaching. And so last semester, back in March, when UB said that, guess what, we are going virtual, and I had one day. And I fought it. How am I going to teach online? How am I going to teach using Zoom and Teams and stuff like that? This is absolutely ridiculous. Well, let me tell you something. Even at the beginning of this semester, in August, I was fighting it. But guess what? I ain't fighting it no more. In fact, I am looking forward to not having to teach face-to-face in the spring. And I shared with my wife, I said, guess what? I don't know if I could go back to face-to-face. I think I'm going to have to introduce some type of hybrid where I teach half the time face to face and the other time online. You see, because so you've got to look, you've got to be able to adapt, okay? And you've got to let some old things go and think in terms of creativity. Okay, look at in the music world. What happened to MP3 players? What happened to tape recorders? What happened to records? What happened to CDs? Okay, all of those things came and they left quickly. So we have to be prepared to move to the new cheese, and we have to enjoy the change, savor the adventures, okay, and enjoy the taste of new cheese. Be ready to change quickly and enjoy it again and again, okay? The way that the world is going, the cheese will change constantly. Creative folks, you have an edge because you can think out of the box. Begin to prepare yourself for constant and rapid change and be prepared to deal with it. The last slide I want to share with you is that which character are you like from the book, Who Moved My Cheese? You see, are you a creative person who sniffs out change early? Or are you someone who moves quickly into action? Do you learn to adapt? Okay? Or do you deny change and refuse to shift? You see, we don't need to be in Ham's position because we are aware that change is inevitable. In fact, change is the only thing moving forward that you can count on. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Maurice. If there are any comments, if there are any questions, I've got a few minutes before I have to leave to go into another clinic. But I just wanted to drop that in your spirits today. Don't allow what's happening to depress us. Even though we have challenges, even though it seems discouraging at times, even though we don't see any opportunities in the near future, the thing is that that should not stop our creative juices from flowing and running. And we should be thinking, how do we get through this pandemic? Maurice?
Awesome presentation, Dr. Richard. We really appreciate it. We'll take a few minutes just for questions before Dr. Richard has to go. Anyone has any questions, you can either post it in the chat or you can unmute and ask a question.
Well, Maurice, I guess
I don't think there are any questions. Yeah, that doesn't seem. Okay, here's one. Okay, as a teacher, how can we help our children to be resilient and lift their spirits? Hold on, and lift their spirits in this digital age.
Okay, what this is really I like the question. We have to demonstrate resilience in us because that impacts students. So this is a social, we do social learning here, okay? And what happens is that people, especially students, they watch us and they mimic what we do. So it's critical that you establish boundaries and you set limits for what I call developing resiliency. If you remember the chart that I showed you, and I'll send this copy to everyone. If you remember the chart that I showed you, resilient people adapt. Resilient people continue to be positive. Resilient people don't allow setbacks in life to knock them down. There used to be a toy in the 1970s, probably before most of you were born, that was called a Weeble Wobble. And what it was is that people wobble, but they don't fall down. Okay, and that's what we've got to pass on to our students. That look here, that there are going to be some crises in life, that there are going to be some challenges. Okay, but the thing is that you will get knocked down from time to time. But the thing is to not to stay down, to be able to recoil, to be able to bounce back over. Let me, if there's The Greek word for resilient is similar, has the same root word for somersault. Now, if you've ever seen someone somersault, like the gymnast, they spin over and over in the air and they land on their feet. And that is what we want to get our students in the school system to understand, that you will be spun over time after time after time, but the key is to be able to land on your feet. And so now with creativity, okay, call on your strengths, not on the negative part, call on your strengths to build resilience. And the thing is that we can all build resilience. So it starts with teachers, it starts with in the home, and it starts with organizations. All of us have to come together to become more resilient.
Awesome stuff. As a guidance counselor too, I found that children, they tend to respond based on how adults respond. So if they're around negativity all of the time, that's what they will mimic. And so they mimic whatever it is that we do or is in their home. And so it's important for us to be positive in throughout this situation and to show them how to bring out this creativity during this time, because I find that many of the children who are more going through kind of the depression mode or always sad and don't seem to be themselves are the ones who are in the homes where persons are always looking at the social media with the pandemic. And you have some parents, unfortunately, who don't understand that there's certain things you don't expose children to as well, And so that's a good point that you made.
Let me share with you one a quick thing. Many years ago, I started off my career in substance abuse treatment, and I was working with young marijuana smokers. And I got burnt out to the point where I just got sick and tired of going to work. And so this would have been in the 80s. And I stopped combing my hair. I stopped ironing my clothes. I stopped wearing socks and stuff like that. And I was a real mess. And I went to work. And about 2 or 3 days after showing up to work like that, I noticed that all of the young men in my group started to take on the same thing. They came to group without their hair being combed, without ironing their clothes, without, dragging slippers and stuff like that. And I realized that as a leader, you impact the people who you lead. And so they saw the way that I was dealing with the situation and they followed through. And that was an eye-opener for me, because it made me realize that regardless of what you do in life, there are people who are looking out and looking up to you. And so the way that you handle situations is critical, because especially in the home, especially in the classroom, wherever you have people who are watching you, and even on teams, people look to leadership to get an idea of how they deal with situations.
Awesome stuff. I see one more question in the chat. It says, how do you cope with working with a team? For example, when you disagree or if you are all stressed?
Okay. Wow. Let me tell you something. Communication in teams is extremely important. Okay. And people need to understand that in a team, we can be free to disagree. It's just what we do with the disagreement. You see? Okay. So first of all, we got to deal with some stress issues, because not everyone knows how to adequately cope with stress. And I think a lot of times the issues, the problems in team dynamics has to do with what we are bringing to the team that shouldn't even be in the team issue to begin with. And so we have a lot of stressors going on in our lives. And the frustrations we sometimes bring to a group, and we take it out on other people who really shouldn't have to deal with it. So my thing is that if I could get my hand on that group, one of the first things I would do is to work with each individual to help them to understand their stressors, you see? Because once you can get people to manage their individual stressors, or even to acknowledge that it's a stress, then then the team dynamics will suddenly change. So let me give you an example. I live at home, and let's suppose me and my wife are having issues. I'm having issues, okay? Of course, when I get to work, I'm not able to just leave those issues at home with her. That's gonna impact me. So I come to work, and if I'm working with a group of people, some of my frustration will be taken out on those persons simply because of what I'm carrying around. there used to be a time when people used to say stuff like, when you come to work, you leave your problems home. But that doesn't work. You know, if you and your husband had a blowdown last night and he hit you on the face and stuff like that, and you got to go to work the next day, you just don't get to the office and say, Black Eye, I'm going to leave you at the door until I get off, and then I'm going to deal with you. No, that doesn't happen. My mom, as soon as I got out of school, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. One of the most difficult things was for me to go to work every day and have to deal with people's issues and the fact that my mom was at home sick. And because I thank God that I was working around mental health professionals who were able to get me through it, because I was very angry, I was very bitter, I was very stressed out. And the fact is that I would have been doing damage to my patients and the people who I worked with if I didn't have a good coping strategy. And so it's important. This is why when I said, go back to those slides with stressors, identify the stressors in your life, because they are the things that provoke you and push you to behave in a certain way. And sometimes when you can't deal with them the way that you need to deal with them, you take it out on other people. It's like me coming home from work because my boss got me angry, okay? And he's putting a lot of pressure on me. And I walk into my house and my son says, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. And I slap him because I say, look, don't mess with me, you know? The thing is that that's because of the stress from work that I'm bringing home. And it's critical that we begin to look at these things and identify those stresses and deal with them. Because if we don't deal with them, then they're going to ruin many relationships that we have.
Awesome stuff. I see, we'll take one last question, and it says, how do you know when to walk away from a situation?
Man, Kenny, what? You got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, know when to run. There's certain things, I'll tell you personally, there's certain things, I size people up very quickly, okay? I size people up very quickly, and it all comes down to me and my family. So let me give you an example, and I think this is a good story. I was driving a couple of years ago, and I stopped at that light in front of Fusion, you know, by Lakeview.
Yes.
And this guy in a truck pulled in the front of me and hopped out of the car and started carrying on and cussing. I don't know who he was, okay? But he was challenging me, calling me all sorts of names. I was trying to figure out whether I had cut in front of him, but I couldn't recall it. I didn't know him. And one side of me said, look here, Richard Adderley, your masculinity is at stake. You need to get out there and you need to deal with him, because no one should be able to talk to you. And then the reality of it was, I looked across at Lakeview and I just saw a headstone. I saw my own headstone, and I saw my wife and I saw my children crying. And I said to myself, is it just worth it for me to go out there and have a confrontation with someone where I could actually lose my life over something that I don't know anything about? And so what I did was that I quickly rolled back up my window, didn't say anything. I put my car in drive, and I pulled in front of him and I sped off, okay? And I always reflect on that, because sometimes in life, we allow our ego to get the better part of us. We allow what other people are gonna say, what other people are gonna think, okay? I think it comes down to you. And there's some situations that don't need to run on. There's some relationships that you don't need to carry on with. I think there's just sometimes you just need to say, look here, I've taken too much out of it. It's not worth it. It's getting the better part of me, and I need to move on. And that could be in personal relationships, that could be in friendships, that could even be in work relationships. Sometimes you're working for an organization, and the thing is that it's taking more out of you than you're getting less enjoyment and more stress. And the thing is that you have to make a wise decision. You have to start to think in terms of, look here, maybe I can't find a job right now, but in 6 months, the climate may change. I need to move on. So it's really being in touch with who you are and knowing yourself. And this is why you got to talk to yourself and you got to be honest with yourself from a personal point of view. And when I mean a personal point of view, there's some relationships that you just need to end because they're just not good for you. They're creating more stress. And I find that when a relationship is creating more stress and I don't have the resources to be able to deal with it, it's time to move on.
Awesome stuff. I know I said that was the last one, but because of the importance of this one, I would just want to do this last question. It says,
Okay.
I was told to go back to work after burying my daughter last week. I know that I am not mentally ready to be in the workplace because I can't give my full attention, but I am expected to function because I am there. How do I deal with it?
If you're not ready, I'll give you two parts of it. If you are not ready, then I would make an appointment to see a mental health provider, okay, who will be able to give you the time off, because if you're not ready, you're not going to function well, okay? Now, on the flip side, there's a new trend and thought that says that the quicker you get back into the daily routine, the better your recovery is. And I'll tell you that it's happening in both the medical and the mental health world. So when I was born, you know, mothers used to be laid up for weeks, okay? And now, if without complications, they have you in and out of hospital in a day or so, because they're saying that the quicker you could get back to routine, it's better. I found personally that when I lost loved ones, when the week that my father died, I had to keep on working from a mental health point of view because that's the way that I operate. But remember, stress is perceptual and we all grieve differently, okay? And so my thing is that if you've reached a point where you're looking at work and you realize that you are unable to cope with it at this particular time, then my advice is rather than just staying at home and telling them you ain't coming back, and seek professional help, so that you could find the resources to help you work through the grief process. Okay, I wouldn't push anyone to go back to work if they're not ready for it. But the thing is that you also have to think in terms of your work and your job, and you need to put in place the protocols that they require so that your job is not impacted.
Awesome
Okay?
stuff.
Okay.
Awesome stuff, Dr. Richard. On behalf of the Power of One organization, its board members and members, and all of the other persons, I see some other educators are here as well. We'd like to say thank you for this wonderful presentation. It seems to have done wonders to many persons in here. Many persons seem very appreciative of this. And so we thank you so much for this, especially during this time with going through this pandemic. So we appreciate you. I pray God's blessings upon you. And I pray God blesses you 1,000-fold for it, and for all of the work that you're doing. And I pray that persons that have listened to this today would be able to use this for the rest of their lives.
Okay. Thank you so much, guy. Okay. And have a great day. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of it. We appreciate you all. God bless. Have a good one.